Ibrahim Traoré just broke his silence on Nigeria. And what he revealed should terrify every Nigerian watching this right now. The president of Burkina Faso didn't issue a diplomatic statement. He didn't call for dialogue. He sent a warning, a direct, calculated warning about what's happening inside Nigeria that your government isn't telling you. According to intelligence shared by the Alliance of Sahel states, President Tinubu's administration is allegedly following a playbook used by regimes before they tighten their grip. And France? France just re-entered the picture, not as a partner, as a protector of the system, not you. The president of Burkina Faso just issued a warning to Nigeria, not about terrorism, not about border security, about what happens when a government starts to fear its own people. Ibrahim Traoré, the military leader who came to power through a coup and has since positioned himself as a Pan-African voice against neo-colonialism, has sent a message across West Africa's most populous nation. And it's not diplomatic, it's direct. He's telling Nigerians to look closely at what's happening in their own country, because according to him, the signs are all there. The signs that a system is tightening its grip, that a government is preparing not for debate, but for control. This isn't about one election. It's not even just about President Bola Tinubu. This is about a pattern, a playbook, one that Traore and the Alliance of Sahel states claim they've seen before, studied before, and are now warning Nigeria about before it's too late. So what exactly is Burkina Faso's leader saying? And why is he saying it now? Traore's warning comes wrapped in the language of the AES, the Alliance of Sahel States, a bloc formed by Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger after all three nations underwent military coups and subsequently severed ties with ECOWAS, the regional body they accused of being a puppet for Western interests, primarily France. The AES has positioned itself as a liberation project, a reclamation of sovereignty, and a rejection of external interference. Whether that narrative holds up under scrutiny is debatable, but the rhetoric is clear. And now, that rhetoric is being aimed squarely at Nigeria. According to the framing attributed to the AES and echoed by Traore, what's unfolding in Nigeria right now is not a routine political cycle. It's a consolidation, a tightening, a moment where the state, under Tinubu's administration, is allegedly doing what embattled governments do when they sense instability. They shut things down. Not all at once, not obviously, but incrementally. Pressure here, a crackdown there, narrative control, legal intimidation, security escalation. The claim is that Nigeria is entering a phase where dissent is being quietly criminalized, where civic space is shrinking, and where the tools of the state are being sharpened not to protect the people, but to protect the system. And Traore is saying, Nigerians, open your eyes. Let's break down what he's pointing to, because this isn't vague. The allegations are specific. First, pressure on opposition voices. In recent months, Nigeria has seen a notable uptick in arrests, detentions, and legal actions against activists, journalists, and opposition figures. Some are accused of treason, others of incitement. The charges vary, but the pattern, according to critics, does not. Those who challenge the government's policies, especially around economic reforms, fuel subsidy removal, and security failures, are finding themselves increasingly isolated, legally vulnerable, or simply silenced. This isn't new in Nigerian politics. Every administration has faced accusations of stifling dissent. But the timing matters. Nigeria is heading toward a crucial political period. The 2027 elections are on the horizon. Public dissatisfaction is palpable. Inflation is crushing households. Insecurity remains chronic. The government's approval ratings are fragile. And in that environment, Traore argues, the state doesn't trust persuasion. It trusts force. Second, shrinking civic space. Civil society organizations, particularly those involved in election monitoring, human rights documentation, and anti-corruption advocacy, have reported increased scrutiny from security agencies. Some have had their operations disrupted. Others have faced funding restrictions or been labeled as foreign agents. The accusation is that the government is preemptively weakening the very institutions that could hold it accountable during sensitive political moments. Again, this is contested. The government's position has often been that such organizations operate with foreign funding and foreign agendas, and that national security requires vigilance. But from the perspective of activists and international observers, what's happening looks less like vigilance and more like suppression. Third, narrative control. Media houses have faced sanctions. Platforms have been threatened with suspension. Social media regulations have been proposed and, in some cases, enforced. The government's argument is that misinformation is a national security threat, that fake news destabilizes society, and that regulation is necessary. But critics, including Traore's camp, argue that what's being regulated isn't misinformation. It's criticism. It's accountability. It's the ability of ordinary Nigerians to organize, to speak, to question. And fourth, heightened security measures. Across major cities, particularly Lagos and Abuja, there's been a visible increase in security presence. Checkpoints, surveillance, arrests during protests. The state frames this as a response to genuine threats, banditry, separatist movements, and terrorism. But the counterargument is that the security apparatus is being repositioned not just to face external threats, but internal ones. The threat of a restless population, the threat of mass mobilization, the threat of another EndSARS. This is where Traore's message gets sharper. He's not just pointing out what's happening, he's naming why. And the why, according to him, is fear. The Nigerian state, he suggests, is afraid, not of foreign invasion, not of insurgents in the northeast or militants in the Niger Delta. It's afraid of its own citizens. It's afraid of what happens when 200 million people, the majority of them young, unemployed, educated, and connected, decide they've had enough. It's afraid of the power of collective anger. And so, instead of addressing the grievances, instead of opening up space for dialogue, reform, or accountability, the system does what systems do when they're scared. They close ranks. They criminalize dissent. They frame opposition as treason. They label protesters as sponsored agents. They prepare for confrontation, not conversation. And this, Traore argues, is the clearest sign that a government has lost legitimacy. Not in the legal sense, but in the moral and popular sense. When a state stops trusting the people, when it starts seeing citizens as threats rather than stakeholders, when it responds to demands for transparency with force rather than reform, then the relationship between the government and the governed has broken down. Is this a strategic move or the start of a larger shift? But there's another layer, and this is where the geopolitics get heavy. Because Nigeria's internal crisis, real or perceived, is not happening in a vacuum. And Traore knows this. The AES knows this. And they're naming it explicitly. France is back in the picture. After being pushed out of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, after losing military bases, mining contracts, and political leverage across the Sahel, Paris has been scrambling to secure what remains of its influence in West Africa. And the biggest prize left? Nigeria. Not in terms of military presence, at least not visibly, but in terms of economic partnerships, diplomatic alignment, and strategic stability. French President Emmanuel Macron has made multiple overtures to Tinubu's government. Trade delegations have visited. Energy deals have been discussed. Security cooperation has been quietly enhanced. And from the perspective of the AES, this is not coincidental. This is France doing what it always does, embedding itself into a political system at a moment of weakness, offering support in exchange for influence, and ensuring that whatever government emerges from Nigeria's political turbulence is one that aligns with French and broader Western interests. The accusation here is that Nigeria's ruling elite, facing domestic pressure and economic crisis, is turning to external powers not for genuine partnership, but for regime stability. That foreign capital, foreign diplomatic backing, and foreign security assistance are being leveraged not to develop Nigeria, but to insulate the government from accountability. And this, Traore warns, complicates everything. Because once foreign interests become entangled in a domestic political crisis, the stakes change. The space for negotiation shrinks. The willingness of the state to compromise diminishes. And the likelihood of a peaceful resolution drops. Because now the government isn't just answerable to its own people. It's answerable to external backers who have their own priorities. Stability, continuity, predictability, not justice, not democracy, not reform. This is the deeper struggle Traore is describing. It's not just Nigerians versus their government. It's Nigerians versus a system that is being reinforced by international actors who have zero interest in systemic change. So what's the end game here? What is Traore actually calling for? He's not calling for a coup, at least not explicitly. He's not urging Nigerians to take up arms or overthrow the state. What he's doing is more subtle and arguably more dangerous for the status quo. He's calling for awareness, for unity, for documentation, for sustained civic action. The message to Nigerians, particularly the youth, is this: do not let them divide you. Do not let ethnic, religious, or regional differences fracture your collective power. Do not fall for the distractions. Do not accept the narrative that you are powerless. Do not resort to violence, because that is exactly what the state wants. Violence justifies crackdowns. Violence legitimizes repression. Violence gives the system the excuse it needs to escalate. Instead, stay organized. Document everything. Use technology. Use social media. Use your networks. Build coalitions. Resist quietly but persistently. And above all, do not give up. Because no system, Traore argues, is permanent. No government lasts forever. And history, he insists, always sides with the people. The question is just how much they have to sacrifice to get there. Now let's pause and assess this. Because Traore's message, however compelling it may sound, needs to be examined critically. First, who is Ibrahim Traoré to be lecturing Nigeria? He came to power through a military coup. He has suspended democratic processes in his own country. He has centralized power. He has cracked down on dissent under the banner of national sovereignty. His government has been accused of extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances, and authoritarian overreach. The AES, despite its anti-imperialist rhetoric, has replaced French influence with Russian mercenaries. So the irony here is thick. A coup leader warning about authoritarianism. A military junta cautioning about repression. Second, is the Nigerian government actually doing what Traore claims? That's debatable. Nigeria is a messy, chaotic democracy. It has problems, deep ones, but it also has a relatively free press, active civil society, and a judiciary that, while flawed, occasionally checks executive power. The Tinubu administration has certainly faced criticism, but it's also operating in an environment of genuine insecurity, economic crisis, and institutional fragility. Some of the measures being taken could be seen as necessary responses to real threats, not preemptive authoritarianism. Third, what's Traore's real motive? Is this genuine Pan-African solidarity, or is it geopolitical posturing? The AES is trying to build legitimacy. It's trying to position itself as a revolutionary force. And what better way to do that than to cast Nigeria, ECOWAS's anchor state, as the villain? What better way to undermine regional cohesion than to frame Nigeria's government as a puppet of Western powers? These are legitimate questions, and they complicate the narrative. But here's what complicates it even further: public sentiment in Nigeria. Because regardless of Traore's credibility, regardless of his motives, the message is resonating. Not universally, not uncritically, but it's resonating because millions of Nigerians are frustrated. They're tired. They're angry. They feel unheard. They feel exploited. They feel like their government serves itself, not them. They feel like democracy has become a performance, a ritual that delivers nothing but disappointment. And when anyone, even a coup leader from Burkina Faso, stands up and says, "You're not crazy. You're not imagining it. The system is rigged and you deserve better," that message finds fertile ground. This is the dangerous part. Not the message itself, but the conditions that make it believable. So what happens next? That's the question hanging over this entire situation. Does Nigeria's government respond? Does it dismiss Traore's warning as foreign interference and continue as planned? Does it double down on security measures, convinced that it's facing a coordinated destabilization campaign? Or does it take the warnings seriously, recognize that public discontent is real, and open up space for dialogue, reform, and accountability? Does the opposition seize this moment? Does it organize more effectively, build broader coalitions, and channel public frustration into a coherent political movement? Or does it fracture, as it so often has, along ethnic and regional lines, allowing the ruling party to consolidate power yet again? Do ordinary Nigerians take to the streets? Do they organize digitally? Do they sustain pressure beyond a single protest cycle? Or do they, exhausted and demoralized, retreat into survival mode, waiting for the next election, the next promise, the next disappointment? And what about the international actors? Does France deepen its involvement, seeing Nigeria as the last strategic foothold in a region slipping away? Does the United States weigh in, trying to balance democracy promotion with stability concerns? Does China continue its quiet expansion, offering infrastructure and investment with no political strings attached, but plenty of economic ones? What happens next could redefine the region. Because if Nigeria, Africa's largest economy and most populous nation, descends into sustained political crisis, the ripple effects will be felt everywhere. ECOWAS loses its anchor. The Sahel loses its counterbalance. The entire West African security architecture becomes unstable. Migration pressures increase. Economic turbulence spreads. And the narrative that democracy in Africa is fragile, reversible, and ultimately unsustainable gains dangerous momentum. But if Nigerians manage to navigate this moment, if they hold their government accountable without descending into chaos, if they prove that sustained civic action can force systemic change, then the story changes. Then Nigeria becomes a model, not a cautionary tale. Then the AES's revolutionary rhetoric loses its appeal. Then the idea that only military intervention can break entrenched systems gets challenged by something more powerful: organized people. This is why Traore's warning matters, even if you don't trust him. Because it's forcing a conversation. It's making Nigerians and observers across the continent ask hard questions about power, about legitimacy, about the relationship between citizens and the state, about whether democracy, as currently practiced, is delivering for ordinary people or just for elites. And those questions don't have easy answers. They require reflection. They require honesty. They require a willingness to admit that something is broken, and that fixing it will take more than elections, more than speeches, more than symbolic gestures. History is watching Nigeria right now, not because it's on the brink of collapse, but because it's at a crossroads. One path leads toward deeper entrenchment, more repression, more cynicism, and eventually more instability. The other leads toward accountability, reform, and the kind of political maturity that turns a crisis into a turning point. Which path Nigeria takes will depend on choices made in the coming months. Choices made by the government. Choices made by the opposition. Choices made by civil society. And most importantly, choices made by ordinary Nigerians, especially the young ones, who have the most to lose and the most to gain. Traore says history sides with the people, but history doesn't act on its own. It's made by those willing to fight for it. The question is, what price will they be forced to pay? And that's the uncertainty Nigeria now faces. Not whether change will come, but how, and at what cost. No system lasts forever, but the transition from one system to another is never guaranteed to be peaceful, or just, or even better. It depends entirely on the forces that shape it, on whether those forces are organized or chaotic, united or divided, strategic or reactive. Right now, Nigeria is still deciding which it will be, and the rest of the continent is watching, waiting, and wondering if this is the moment everything shifts. Because if it does, the implications won't stop at Nigeria's borders. They'll reshape West Africa. They'll challenge the credibility of regional institutions. They'll test the limits of foreign influence. And they'll force every government in the region to ask itself, are we next? That's the real message behind Traore's warning. Not just what's happening in Nigeria, but what it means for everywhere else, and whether the playbook of power consolidation and repression can still work in a generation that's connected, informed, and increasingly unwilling to accept the old rules. The answer to that question will define the next chapter of African politics. And it starts now, in Nigeria, with a warning from Burkina Faso, and a choice that belongs to the people.